We are glad to host and organize this particular session and welcome you all for this session. And without wasting much time, I would now like to, first of all, thank the esteemed panelists to be here for discussing this topic. And to start with, I would first like to call upon Dr. Neeta Verma, who is she is the Director General of National Informatics Center, the premier ICT organization of Government of India implementing Digital India initiatives of the country. So she would be moderating the session, and other esteemed panelists for the session, we have Mr. Jan Nudze, Director of Cybersecurity Policy, Microsoft. He is the head of cybersecurity policy at Microsoft and looking after Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which is EMEA region. In this role, Jan works with government, industry, and civil society stakeholders on a range of cybersecurity issues. I welcome you, Mr. Jan. Then we have Mr. Whitley Kamlok. Apologies if I am pronouncing it wrong. So Whitley has been involved in malware research at Kaspersky Labs since 2005. In 2008, he was appointed senior antivirus expert before going on to become director of the EMEA Research Center in 2009. We welcome you, Mr. Whitley. Then we have a professor in between us, Professor Maninder Agarwal from IIT Kanpur. And he's a professor for the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. In 2003, he was conferred with the Distinguished Alumnus Award in recognition of his work on complexity theory and for developing a polynomial time algorithm for primality testing. We welcome you, Professor. Next, we have Mr. Sanjay Katka, who is co-founder at QuickHeal. He is Joint Managing Director and Chief Technology Officer of QuickHeal Technologies since its inception. He leads the global technology strategy and is responsible for the core research and development of the cybersecurity solutions. We welcome you, Mr. Sanjay. Next, we have Mr. John Suffolk, President at Huawei Technologies Company Limited. He's Global President of Security and Privacy, covering 170 countries and technology from smartphones to cloud computing to global infrastructure. He is former UK government CIO and the security officer reporting to 3 successive prime ministers. We welcome you, Mr. John. Lastly, we have Mr. Shiva Dasri, who is Chief Technical Officer at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He is responsible for security technology strategy and architecture built into HPE hybrid IT products, including servers, storage, and network devices. We welcome you, Mr. Shiva. So I would now like to hand over to Dr. Neeta to please start with the session. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to you all. A real challenge to keep you awake after such a sumptuous lunch. Let's all try our best to do it. But I'm sure with such a distinguished panelist on my panel, it would not be difficult for us to do that. So the topic today is critical information infrastructure, policies and framework. Any infrastructure is said to be critical if the disruption of that infrastructure could cause a socio-economic crisis. It could have some kind of, it have a potential to impact national security or safety of the citizens of that country or of that region. Therefore, by and large, power, water, health, communication networks now, finance and banking are considered to be, defense considered to be critical infrastructure. Over the last 1 decade or so, we have seen that all of this infrastructure has a growing dependence on information technology. From using information technology for monitoring and managing these infrastructure from these to these critical infrastructures, now even the operations of this infrastructure is driven through information technology. While on one side we really feel the power of to be able to operate these devices or monitor these devices or manage these devices from remote or these infrastructure. This, on the other hand, this also makes them more vulnerable. And with things like Internet of Things and IPv6, this scenario is going to become more and more complex. We have also been seeing for last decade or so a really fast growing landscape of cyber threats. They are not only increasing in terms of their complexity, in their extent, and in terms of their sophistication also, there's been evolving like anything. Such kind of cyber incidences which happen to a routine ICT system, they have an impact, but if you have proper mechanisms, you kind of recover. But if these kind of attacks come on this critical information infrastructure, this could have far more severe impacts. Impacts could be huge and sometimes something from which we can't even recover. So therefore, it has become truly pertinent for everyone to really think and kind of work out a strategy that how do we really protect our critical information infrastructure. Lot of efforts have been done by countries across the world. People have built institutions, they have policies, frameworks. But I feel in the wake of this new kind of threats coming, and we have also seen some kinds of incidences already happening. We had power outage in some country because of this kind of an attack. We had seen there was an attack to contaminate the water facility, water supply at one place. We'd also seen this Stuxnet attack coming in. Then SWIFT system itself was under attack. So since these attacks are also happening, I think the kind of efforts we are making, we perhaps need to leapfrog or make it up by multifold. In India also, we have this National Critical Information Infrastructure and Protection Center, which has kind of built a framework and guidelines and all. But perhaps now is the need to put this effort, increase this effort manifold. Not only we need to have these frameworks or compliance systems in place, we need to have a kind of a capacity building in the institutions who are operating these things. And also perhaps somewhere there is a need of setup of specialized sector specific or something, rescue teams who could come to the rescue of these institutions when there is any such crisis happen to minimize the impact or the damage which that particular incident caused. There is also a need of, because many of time these attacks could be across the boundaries of different countries, around the jurisdiction of different countries and states and all. So there is a need of some kind of a collaboration and cooperation there. So with this, I think, so this is what is the theme of our session today, and I am really delighted to have an esteemed panel with me, and I'm sure they are going to cover each of these different dimensions of this whole ecosystem which we are talking about. The normal format is we'll have 5 to 7 minutes, each of the speaker will speak, and after that we'll see if there are some questions unanswered, and then we are going to make it open to you. So please keep your good questions ready to challenge the panelists to answer your questions. Thank you. May I now request Professor Maninder Agrawal to give us an overall perspective, how are we as far as the availability of technology or know-how in this domain to address this critical issue.
Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here in front of all of you. And I thank the organizers for inviting me for this session. I bring a slightly detached perspective to this issue, being in academia, which kind of lives in a slightly different world. It's a very interesting phenomena that has been happening in, let's say, last decade or so in our world, that we have exceptionally rapid evolution of cyberspace, digital technologies, and the number of people making use of it. We have just about every kind of service moving on to the digital world because it provides tremendous ease of access and tremendous ease of use. Now, as Madam pointed out, this comes with the flip side that we also, when we ease the access to an important system, it also eases the access of the set of people who use it for not so appropriate purpose. And that's where the issue of protecting our important infrastructure, which is on cyberspace, from such illegal or incorrect usages. Now, because we have had a very rapid evolution, what has happened is that things in terms of security of the system haven't quite, I won't say kept up pace. We are keeping up pace, but still there are many lacunas which exist. One of the most important one is that we still have a large number of legacy systems in terms of, we have a system, you develop a software for it, and then when you start using the same system for its critical infrastructure usage, then you develop a security patch to it. Now, the security of the system, therefore, was many times is not thought through ab initio, and that leaves various kinds of holes in the system. And as we can all understand, any breach to a critical infrastructure system is absolutely critical, because by the very nature of the system, it's serving a large number of people or very important components of a nation, and therefore its security is essential. So what we need, therefore, is a very quick and fast response mechanism to handle such security needs. Generically, we need policies and various tools to handle the systems. And when we talk about tools, we must keep in mind, when I talked about the legacy system, so we have to develop tools which are not only useful for, workable for new systems, they should also work for existing systems. Now, one of the very critical requirements, which is not so far given enough thought in protection of critical infrastructure, is the possibility of an insider attack. Now, an insider attack is something which represents knowing or unknowing use of an insider to the system for the breach of the system. In many of the attacks which have happened in recent times, in one way or the other, part of it was through an insider. And the problem with an insider attack is that inherently the system tends to trust an insider, and therefore is not so careful about giving all kinds of access to the insider. And that is something one needs to be very wary of and keep in mind when developing the security of the system. There is one more very important aspect, which again is perhaps not so well thought of, because it's not clear what the solution to that is, and that is a psychological aspect. In a physical world, when we as humans are generally trained from our childhood to be security conscious. We were told by our elders, friends, that the do's and don'ts of ensuring physical security of ourselves or anything that we hold dear to. There are areas one should not go to at various points in time, and there are certain things one should do and there are certain things one should not do. Now, when we come to the cyber world or cyberspace, the access happens inside a very secure, well-furnished and well-equipped room. there is no sense of a physical danger presence. And humans haven't yet developed this sense of a cyber danger. And so we tend to do many things in the cyber world which we'll definitely not do in physical world. So that also contributes to increased risk in the cyber world. As I said, I don't think we have a solution to this. Perhaps psychologists and sociologists need to think about and come up with mechanisms to address this. Thank you, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Professor Agrawal. May I now request Shiva Dasri, who is the Chief Technology Officer, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, to share his views.
Thank you, Dr. Neeta Verma. Thank you all for attending this meeting. It's really exciting to see so many people. Hall is almost full. So when it comes to protecting critical information infrastructure, it's really very broad, right? It's not easy thing to talk about, and it's obviously not easy to cover within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever. So what I'm going to focus is on my favorite topic, which is more of a firmware, hardware, and management software area of the critical infrastructure. And my other co-panelists going to focus on operating system and other layers. You really have good coverage here, so I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about somewhat neglected area and which has serious implications. Just before start of this meeting, Dr. Neeta Verma brought up issues related to embedded systems, IoT. It's really huge security issue, and we really need to figure out how we can address those issues. So before going into details, I would like to quickly talk about whenever you're trying to protect infrastructure, you really need to understand what are the components and who are the players. Who are the folks trying to get onto that data center or cloud or whatever the critical infrastructure happens to be. One thing I'd like to quickly bring up is attackers are not anymore hobbyists or hacktivists trying to get on the systems and try to steal some data for fun. They evolved over a period of time. In my view, they transformed into criminals or criminal gangs with enormous resources, and they are doing attacks for monetary benefits, not anymore just to satisfy their ego that, oh, I can go and get onto this system or servers or whatever it happens to be. And things get really complicated when you start thinking about nation states involving in this, right? It's a little bit scary when it comes to nation states. They have really large amount of resources and they can pretty much do anything. So the topic I'm going to focus is how do we design in hardware, firmware, and management layer of the infrastructure so that they are going to be secure. My co-panelist, Dr. Maninder, mentioned a little bit about insider threats. I think when it comes to technology, I like to make assumptions that you don't even trust insiders. Those things are possible because of the advancements happened in the technology, and you can pretty much detect any insider threats and also potentially recover to known good state. I'm talking about the layer below the operating system, firmware, hardware, or the management stack that you use. How can we do those? Is there a technology available currently? Of course, technology is evolving, and I think a lot of the frameworks and all the guidelines, policies, what you're going to hear or very high level tells you how to protect critical infrastructure. But my discussion or the topic going to be a little bit deeper. What kind of technology is available to protect embedded systems, for example, or PCs, or servers, or printers, or whatever the device happens to be? Historically, as we all know, there is a lot of focus on the operating systems, applications, and for right reasons. I'm not saying that we focused on wrong area or anything like that. I think that is still the necessity, and we must continue to invest in that area. Because of the changed threat scenario and because of the skill levels of attackers, we really need to look into different layers of the infrastructure. That's where firmware comes into picture. So some of you may be thinking that firmware, what is it? And it must be really small, few hundreds of lines of code, or maybe few thousands. It's not few thousands lines of code. Sometimes it can be few million lines of code. And you will be surprised if you look at any typical server before operating system is brought up, there's millions of lines of code run. And if things can go wrong there, all bets are off. And other reason why in the world these attackers really looking into firmware, because they are able to get into operating system. We hear every day in the media, if not every day, every other day, that they got into some kind of data center or cloud or whatever and stolen data and all that. I think firmware is becoming more and more attractive for a couple of main reasons. One is, once they get in the firmware, they can stay there without undetected. We did some study, so it's not going to be detected for months, sometimes years. You won't even know that your firmware is compromised. And it can do all sorts of bad things in the background, and it's really getting very, very attractive to attackers, because one of the property of attackers is they really want to be hiding in the infrastructure so that they can do whatever they want to do at their will or at the right time, what they think is the right time. So other reason firmware is really attractive is it's relatively easy to do denial of service attacks. And Dr. Neeta Verma brought up a little bit about infrastructure, utilities, and all that. Imagine a situation where bad guys attack utility infrastructure. Could be your power, water, whatever that happens to be. And if they bring down all the servers controlling the entire infrastructure, it's going to take not days, probably months to recover. So it's really scary. So those kind of opportunities are the ones motivating attackers as well as nation states to figure out very creative ways to get into the systems. They are looking into firmware, they are looking into hardware, they are looking into the management infrastructure. And imagine what could happen with all these IoT and embedded systems. It's pretty scary. So if somebody can figure out a way to get into these IoTs, pretty much they can do anything they want. And they are very critical, and nobody can stop using them because we need them. They are really helpful. And we want to make sure that those devices are secured. And a lot of the existing technologies can be used to secure IoT. IoT is not a alien device that came up and we need to start from scratch. One of the things I always propose is that we need to leverage existing technologies which were already there for quite some time, built into servers or built into switches or built into PCs and any other component you can think of. I completely understand IoT devices are really resource constrained. You won't be able to secure the same way as you secure server because they are not that powerful and they may not have resources that you need for performing some very advanced level of protections. But by implementing some of the basic security features into these IoT devices and embedded devices, it is possible to secure very thoroughly. And a couple of other aspects I want to briefly touch on is when it comes to firmware or hardware or management software, there are really two key kind of areas we need to be focusing. One is how do we protect during runtime? How do we make sure that bad guys are not getting onto these entities? Or if they can find a way to get in, how do we detect it and how do we recover it? That is the one aspect, runtime. And there is a more serious aspect of security for these devices. I would call that as a supply chain security. So typically, whenever you think about supply chain, people tend to think that, oh, as long as I'm getting my parts or the servers or clients, networking, whatever from certain vendor, I'm good, I don't have to worry. Things are changing in a global economy. Products are manufactured all over the world, and nobody knows which part of the product is manufactured where. And when they are manufactured across the world in different countries, there is going to be some kind of transit involved, and there is going to be some warehousing involved. They are going to store those somewhere. And there is also going to be some opportunity for bad guys to leverage or exploit when these products are in the pre-deployment stage. So they are not in the production, but they are sitting at the customer place, and bad guys can do some exploitation there. So there are many vulnerable points, right? It could be manufacturing, it is transit or warehouse, or sometimes even partners involved. Not anymore where you directly buy servers from the vendor and you get everything secure. So the key aspect of ensuring this supply chain security in terms of code and hardware going to be, how do we use technology to detect it? I think process not going to help that much. They could help to a certain extent, but whenever manual processes are involved, there is a clear exposure. So that's where using technologies like HPE built a technology called Silicon Root of Trust, which essentially enables detection of any of the supply chain attacks. And it not only detects supply chain attacks, it also recovers to a known good state. I gave Silicon Root of Trust as an example because to make a case that there are solutions exist, it's not something no technology exists. I think it's more of a adapting the technologies, refining the technologies to solve some of the real problems. And the other thing I would like to bring up to handle the supply chain security and also runtime security is some of the industry standards efforts. One of such organization is Trusted Computing Group, where I'm really involved with that organization. I sit on the board, and they specify requirement for a security chip called TPM. Some of you must have heard about it. So TPM gives you capabilities to detect any of the firmware or even the OS stack. If somebody is shipping OS from the manufacturing, there are ways you can use TPM to detect it. And on top of it, I'm extending a little bit. In the cloud world, I'm sure some of you thinking, Shiva is talking all about firmware and hardware and what about my cloud, right? Yeah, the similar solutions can also help. TPM, for example, can help in the cloud before placing the workload. You can use TPM's capabilities to really figure out whether that particular server where your workload going to be running is that in a trusted state. What kind of code stack it booted? Did it boot the right firmware, launched right hypervisor or operating system application? So all those capabilities are available so that orchestrators can really make a choice before deploying the workload. They can talk to these different servers and figure out, okay, server number 1, 5, 10 are the trusted, and this is where I want to deploy the workforce. There may be some workloads where you may not really care much about security. I think that is going to go away soon, but in those cases, you can deploy on the other servers. And on top of that, there are also technologies exist to even figure out where this server located, right? Some of the workloads in the cloud are really geography sensitive, and you really don't want to send some of that data to across the oceans or whatever, so that you can detect where the server is located and you can deploy workloads accordingly. So in general, what I'm trying to say is that I think when it comes to lower level, below the operating system, firmware, system management stack, or hardware is the one of the area we all should be paying attention to and cannot afford to ignore, because that is getting more and more attractive to bad guys. And when we're talking about protecting critical information infrastructure, that is one of the key aspect, and I'm sure a lot of you agree with that. And with that, I want to conclude my talk, and thank you for listening. And I think if you have any questions, I think you will have opportunity at some point to ask, and I will be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva. You have tried to highlight that the technology to protect these systems is there. We perhaps need to have a right technology, and more importantly, need to know that know-how how to protect the technologies. And your mention of supply chain attacks and the technology to really address those was very interesting. Thank you once again. Let me now request Mr. Sanjay Katkar, who's co-founder of Quick Heal, to share his views.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for having me here for this exciting discussion on critical infrastructure protection policies and frameworks. So I would like to start with, like, I come from a background of malware analysis. Like, I am a founder of Quick Heal Technologies, and so my experience of fighting viruses has been more than 25 years now. And so I'll be putting forward the perspective of how and what is the threat to the CIS and how it has been evolved over the years. So if I have to recall all the things, like, see, when it started, when I started my career into this as a malware analyst, I started analyzing viruses. This was in late 80s and early 90s. So those days viruses were not initially so big a problem for CIS, I'll say, but in fact, the word CI itself was not built at that time. So we started seeing malwares, and how it evolved is, like, initially viruses were written for a hobby, or the teenagers, or script kiddies, or very talented programmers who were really trying to show their skills, how they can infiltrate into the systems and all that. So those kind of things that time were very sensational, but now we do feel that it were very, very stupid kind of code, and it was very easy to tackle that. But as things evolved, as technologies came, so as we saw the usage of emails growing in, like, say, during 93, 94, we started seeing BSNL launch their email services in India, and we started seeing the change in malware. We started seeing more worms infecting the computers. Worms were the threats that started spreading through emails. And then as the internet became faster, like, we started seeing broadband, and we started seeing a very completely different kinds of malwares that started targeting, in the sense, user information, stealing information. And that was particularly on the side of cybercrime, in the sense, the cyber criminals on some part of the world was targeting users and innocent users on different parts of the world by just making use of internet and trying to steal their credentials. And all this started very fast. And And by the time 2000 appeared, and we started seeing threats that are completely different, in the sense threats which were very fast in spreading. If we recall the threat called as Code Red, which spread across the globe in just half an hour actually. And that was the beginning of a completely different kind of threats, wherein we call as threats only in the wire threats, or threats that are in memory threats. We have seen Slammer, we have seen Code Red, we have seen these kind of threats which completely spread automatically without human intervention, and just search for vulnerabilities across the internet and ping those machines and exploit the vulnerability and infect the computers. So those were the threats that started doing rounds. And by the year 2007-8, when we started seeing mobile smartphones penetrating a lot, and we started seeing cross threats which started infecting mobiles as well, and started stealing information from mobile phones as well. And as in this decade, we started seeing the growth of cryptocurrencies. We saw a completely different threat as ransomware started increasing. In the sense, earlier, in very early days, like say around 2004-5, we have seen few ransomwares, but they were not very successful because there was no cryptocurrency, and they used to ask for ransom in the form of credit cards, prepaid cards, which were eventually traceable, and gradually they were caught. And so ransomware were not success at that time. But when we started seeing cryptocurrencies growing very fast, and that really made the job for ransomware easier. And now you have seen ransomware is the biggest problem in last 3-4 years. We have seen it grown in leaps and bounds. And in fact, this year we have seen almost 2 bigger attacks. One of them was WannaCry ransomware, which in fact was one of the biggest ransomware attack across the globe. And the cryptocurrency was the medium that they asked for money through actually. And so what my observation has been is that dealing with malwares, and we are, since we are into product, we deal with customers as well, and the way customers are using our products to protect their systems, and how they think security and how they take security and threats. That's the very critical crux here I would like to share. My experience tells that there are only 2 problems. The whole experience of these many years tells there are only 2 problems. I can bring down all the problems to these 2 problems, and if we can solve them, then that's the easiest way to really start focusing how to protect CIS. So one problem is about technology, and the other problem is people problem. So we can bifurcate the problems in these 2 problems, and the technological problem is still easily manageable, I'll say, because there's a solution. There's people work on solution, and they are available. In the sense, vulnerabilities, if we say why machine gets infected, because some threats exploits a vulnerability in that system, and then it's able to get full access to the system, and then it gets executed. So why the system is vulnerable? System is vulnerable because somewhere some coder left a bug into his code. And why the bug was left? Because, okay, the coder is a human being and he can do a mistake. Humans do mistake. And that's where we see vulnerabilities that are getting discovered day by day. And since we are seeing that there are millions of lines of codes being generated every day, and it's like there's always a pressure from marketing and market that we have to release a product on certain date, on certain time. And in that pressure, developers do a mistake and they leave a bug into the code, which gradually some hacker stumbles upon or creates a tool to find such bugs. And then once that bug is known, they write a code to exploit it. So vulnerabilities is one of the biggest threat, and so to deal that, there's always a patch available from the vendor who has written the code. Or so patch is the solution. So what I'm trying to say is, for technological problem, there's always a technological solution which is easily available. And the other problem that I was going to talk about is about the people. People problem is something which is very difficult to solve. and that I have experienced over the years. In the sense, people here, when I'm trying to say people problem, it's about educating them, it's about putting processes, it's about making them learn things, and make them follow certain protocol to make sure that they do security processes. But why it is difficult? I can give you a simple example. Is that see. A hacker, what hacker does and how he focuses on to a small weak points of a human being. The best example would be to explain you about is, like if you remember, like in 2012 there was a LinkedIn leak. Actually, all the username passwords of LinkedIn were leaked actually, and they were available on the internet. Now, why that hacker would have done that? Actually, the leak happened in 2012, but it was disclosed 2 years back, actually. In fact, yes, almost 18 months back. And when it was disclosed, it came to know that almost every user on LinkedIn was compromised or breached. In the sense, if you all are having any LinkedIn account, it's high probability that your password was leaked. And that hacker from Russia who stole that credential, he tried to sell it on the net, and there were some hackers who eventually tried to buy the code. Now you'll think why he would like to buy and what is it going to be used for. So any hacker who buys the code, the passwords, he or she, particular modus operandi would be to search for a Gmail account into the LinkedIn leaked passwords. And if there is a Gmail email address as a username and there's a password, he will try to log into that Gmail account using the same password. And the first mistake that human, if he has done, is that using the same password across the portals, he might get hacked, because then the Gmail account is open to the hackers. Now, how Gmail account will be misused? So the hackers, what they do is they just log into their Gmail account, they search all the emails of the users, and then they try to find out they'll look for a particular mails which are focused towards, say, registration towards some portal or a online payment gateway or somewhere where you have used that email as your email address, and you have got a welcome email onto their Gmail box. So that mail gives them idea that where all you have used the Gmail to be as a username, and that's how he tries to access those accounts. And the same password, if it is there, he will try to access. And if the password is different, it's still easy for the hacker to get the password, because if you have a email access and the email password, it's still easier to get the password of any account where you have used that email address as a username. Example, if you have used that for, say, Flipkart or any other website, and if you go there and say you have forgotten the password, the reset email or reset password mail is sent to your email, which is again accessible to the user, and he can easily reset the password and take control of the account. So this is how the human problem is, or people problem is complex. This is how the things become complex. And that's where, when I'm here for this discussion, I would like to, I will be happy to discuss on the parts where and learn that how this people problem can be solved, or like the main aspect of like capability building in terms of human resources is very important for CIS. So the capability to detect, to investigate or analyze or respond to a cyber threat is so critical, and if that kind of competency is not there with the CII, it's going to be very difficult for the CII to really understand the threat, or to take control of the situation, or handle the situation or crisis. To this, I'll again give you one example, and here again I can understand the 2 points aspect I would like to give with this example is that capability building is important. At the same time, industry or private cooperation with the private industry is also important. So integrating or having interaction with public or private organizations and having tie-ups to solve the problems is going to make the things simpler. If we have to look at this example, say around in the year, say 2007 or 8, when the phishing was not very prominent, but they've started seeing some phishing. I'm talking about the Indian banks actually. We having a user base across India, which is in millions, so we were the first to see a phishing site mails being spammed to users. And when I myself went through that mail, I saw that there's a phishing website created by a hacker somewhere in Korea. And the hacker is from some other country, but the site was hosted in Korea. And the users were from India because the bank was Indian. And all the mails were being spammed, and that was a nationalized bank, which I immediately we tried to solve the problem by we had an anti-phishing feature which stopped the thing. But at the same time, I tried to alert the bank by calling their IT team and telling them that this is the phishing site and this is happening. To my surprise, there was nobody who could understand what is phishing site and what could have been done or what to be done actually. And then they really said that, okay, we'll ask our IT guy to call you, who is not here. And the IT guy called me 2 days later actually. Okay, 2 days that phishing site was there, and I was just like, my job is to try to protect customers, but at the same time I was trying to see how can we help the bank to take down the site, how can they take the help. So after 2 days, when that guy called, that was from some Delhi branch, and I talked to that guy, and the guy said, okay, what is the problem? And I said, there's a fake site which is being created and which is there, and you really need to push that thing. And that's how I interacted with the guy, and I realized, okay, this is how people problem is going to be there, and they have to really interact because they really didn't understand phishing problem. And I have to educate him about creating a team to focus on the critical aspect of the bank is about the phishing sites. And that's how the first interaction of our industry happened with the banks. And then the team was created, and the phishing site, the incident got solved by dealing with the cert of the Korea. But this is something that is a good example that can tell you how important it is to interact with the industry for an CIA, as well as build the capacity in-house to solve the problems and mitigate them actually. I would like to discuss more as we go through the questions that are raised through customer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. I'm sorry I have to do this bad job, but no option. You have very rightly tried to highlight the evolving landscape of virus, worms, and malware as we as a society are getting more and more connected, and I'm seeing the impact is also becoming far more than what it was there. And I completely agree with your point that there's a great need of creating capacity, not within the institutions which are delivering or managing this infrastructure, also the society at large to be aware of these things, to be able to together overcome that crisis which any time comes. Thank you once again. May I now shift to Mr. Jan Newts, who's the Director of Microsoft, to share his views.
Great, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm extremely pleased to be able to speak to you, be part of this panel. This is in fact the 4th global conference on cyberspace I've been able to attend, and from a Microsoft perspective, we couldn't be more thrilled to be here in India with you. We think India has a tremendous set of opportunities in the way that it is digitizing its economy. It is rapidly doing so. We at Microsoft are deeply committed to that digitization process here in India. We have a lot of investments in India, including multiple large data centers. A large number of our talent base and talent pool is from India, and so many of the products and services that you're using have significant components that are being manufactured, including here. So that's just something I wanted to say to start out. But it is interesting, over these last 4 global conferences and the 5 that we've had in total, it does seem to me that we are continuing in many ways to have to address many of the same issues. The topic of critical infrastructure protection has been an important one for the last decade, you could argue, when I think we first saw in a much more structured way operational technology and information and communication technology, so OT and IT, coming together in a much more succinct and meaningful way. And on the one hand, that has driven a huge set of opportunities for enhanced productivity and many other benefits, but it also, of course, has led to a set of risks and challenges that we now have to deal with as we see this increasing connection between OT and IT. But there are a couple of other factors, I think, that are driving this discussion around critical infrastructure protection, both from a policy perspective for governments, as well as from a response and responsibility perspective for industry. And I would just name two factors in addition to this merging of OT and IT. One is, much of it is powered by cloud computing, right? We are today not only at the advent, but really already pretty far down the road in broad-scale adoption of hyperscale cloud computing capabilities. As one of the largest cloud computing providers in the world, we, of course, have a significant interest in advancing the adoption of cloud, but we're doing so with the belief that adopting cloud technologies can actually lead to incredible benefits for our customers and, in fact, incredible benefits on the security side. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're addressing some of the security challenges that clearly come, especially as cloud technology starts to underpin many of the other industries and technologies, including some critical infrastructures when you think about the finance sector or transport sectors. But then the third element, in addition to the two I mentioned, clearly has to do with the broad-scale digitization and specifically the adoption of the Internet of Things, or the sort of rollout of the Internet of Things. With IoT, we have billions of devices that are quickly becoming connected. We have a significant increase in the volume of data that is generated. But the challenge is that unlike some of the traditional software and hardware manufacturers who have over the last couple of decades had to learn in some cases some very hard security lessons, many of the new entrants, if you will, in the IoT space are just at the beginning of this. They have a huge opportunity to learn from some of those lessons and some of the mistakes that were made in the past, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's doing that. And so we have seen, to some degree, some of this was already mentioned on the panel, a number of attacks in recent years that actually managed to take over insecure devices that may have been developed and put on the market without the proper security built in. And I think that's a significant challenge we all need to face in the coming years. So I think those are sort of three broad trends that many of you are familiar with, but I think it's worth highlighting because it does shape the way that both the policy discussion is emerging as well as what industry's response looks like. And so let me just talk about those two aspects. What are we doing from an industry perspective? As a global cloud provider that we have become over the last several years, really, many of the things we're implementing on cloud security are actually drawn from many of the lessons that we learned when we shipped box products, really. We had a set of standards and practices, what we call the security development lifecycle, which is our way of developing securely in a methodological and secure way. It's been a mandatory policy at Microsoft since 2004. And it basically means we're building security in at every stage of the product development lifecycle. Now we've taken that, and we've taken that construct and the approach, and we've actually applied it to our over 200 cloud services, and we're calling that the Operational Security Assurance, or OSA. So we have SDL, we have OSA, and that's been sort of the foundational elements of what we do when we talk about security by design. On top of that, though, we have a unique advantage, given our scale, that we are receiving lots and lots of global threat intelligence and telemetry. And I think our colleagues will talk about that, the importance of that a little bit later. But from our perspective, given that we have over 1 billion users in the world and over multiple billions of endpoints that are generating trillions of data points every day, we're able to take that intelligence, bring it together in a more structured way, use machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually identify patterns, identify malicious behavior in a much more automated way, and then correlate that with what some of our human security analysts are able to do. And so we have a posture really that leverages this amount of big data for security in ways that we couldn't before. And just to give you one example, it's fascinating when you think about what you're able to automate today. Simple examples include things like if you're logging into an email account, say an Office 365 account here in New Delhi, and then an hour later there's a login maybe in New York City, clearly something can't be right simply in terms of the correlation of time and distance. And so it's given the telemetry we have, it's fairly straightforward to be able to flag that in an automated way to a user as a potential malicious activity. And so we're able to engineer these things in from the ground up, and that gets us very far. There is, of course, a challenge in that many of these threats we're seeing are getting a lot more sophisticated and a lot more advanced. And part of that, again, as already mentioned, is that we're no longer dealing with a set of criminals sitting in, or teenagers really sitting in their basements and doing some of this stuff. There's some of that. But broadly speaking, what we are most concerned about to date is the professionalization of cybercrime on the one hand, and we've seen this in some of the tools that are being used, and then the activity of nation states in this space, which are developing offensive capabilities on the other hand. And so, as I just mentioned, the telemetry that we have at Microsoft enables us, through teams like the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, to actually track these groups and follow them and anticipate some of their activity. And then whenever we see these groups trying to attack either Microsoft directly or some of our customers, we're able to, when we detect these activities, we're able to not only block those attempts or remediate them, but we're able to actually take those benefits and apply them across the board to anyone that is using our cloud services. And so we kind of call that the cloud effect for security. So lots of opportunity in that space. But one of the elements I think that's important to notice is that industry really alone cannot solve these challenges. And so what we've seen over the last few years is that governments, of course, have become much more active in this discussion. It's really interesting. Parts of our team is tracking some of these developments very closely, because oftentimes we have governments that come to us and say, hey, can you help us actually devise frameworks for how we can better collaborate with industry? What sort of strategies should we think about? And so at this point, we're seeing over 90 governments in the world actually developing critical infrastructure protection frameworks, a set of policies, and to some degree regulation. A couple of key examples that stand out, if you're interested. The European Union recently adopted a new cybersecurity directive called the Network and Information Security Directive, and it's actually a really interesting approach for how to think about critical infrastructure protection. It focuses both on more traditional critical infrastructures, such as banking, finance, transport, health, water systems, and a number of others. It also has something to say and a few new rules for digital providers, and we think that by and large is a good thing in order to incentivize companies across the board to invest more in security. And essentially says it has two requirements for industry and has more or less two requirements for government. Industry essentially is told that you have to implement a certain set of baseline security measures. So how do you actually make sure that you are able to defend against these attacks, recover from attacks, and have sort of a baseline risk management framework in place? That is a good thing. The second piece is, how do you think about incidents and how do you coordinate incidents and your incident response with government? And so there is a provision for incident reporting in this directive as well, which has become a thing that governments tend to really care about, because obviously when there are large-scale incidents that affect critical infrastructure, you want to make sure that you can, as a government, collaborate with industry and ensure your populations are safe. And so there's an incident reporting element in there. Governments are told to do two things as well. Governments are told you have to have a national cybersecurity strategy in place, and you have to have a computer incident response team, a CERT. And so those two things, again, are fairly straightforward. They're fairly basic. But you'd be surprised that even in places and regions like Europe, how great the divergence is. by far not every country has these two things in place. It's getting a lot better, and there are a lot of investments being made in that space, but there is a bit of catch-up to do. And then many other regions in the world are doing similar things. For example, when we look here at Asia, Singapore recently adopted a set of policies that we think are really an interesting approach, as well as several other countries on a global scale. There's a bit of a question for how to make sure that as these policies emerge, we can make sure that there's some degree of coordination and harmonization, because ultimately there is a set of best practices out there, and we want to make sure that we don't necessarily end up with 90 different approaches that industry would then have to follow. And so we're fairly active in trying to work with governments to make sure that we can put frameworks in place that are coordinated and are streamlined. Finally, let me just talk very briefly a little bit about the international aspect of this. I talked about what industry is doing. I talked about the national, to some degree regional set of policies that are being put in place. But it's also, I think, important, and there's a lot of discussion at this conference about what some of the international rules of the road should look like. Rules of the road that we believe are currently insufficient. There is existing international law that applies to cyberspace, and we think that is a critical baseline. But many of the attacks that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and many of the attacks that were mentioned as examples here, such as WannaCry, were not necessarily prohibited under existing rules. And so we believe that there is a gap in that space, and we have advocated quite a bit on what else might be done to analyze where the gaps might lie, and then think about some norms that could be applied in response to some of these attacks that we've seen. And I just want to be very clear. The international community is at this point debating a lot how existing international law applies, and that is important. Most of that is taking place in the context of what is called armed conflict, so wartime rules. Challenge is much of the malicious activity we're seeing are actually below that threshold. And so we need to put frameworks in place that enable us to have a set of peacetime rules, to have clarity of what type of behavior is inbounds and what should be out of bounds. And one of the central elements, and this is why I'm mentioning this here, is that we fundamentally believe that critical infrastructure, civilian critical infrastructure, outside of the context of an armed conflict or war, if you want to call it that, should be protected from this type of activity, should not be targeted. Because as I come back to my opening statement, as we're thinking about how many devices are getting connected, how OT and IT are coming together, how cloud is being adopted at a global scale, none of that will be sustainable if we are heading down a path where targeting critical infrastructure outside of nation-state conflict becomes some type of acceptable behavior. And so I just want to leave you with that call to action, really. I very much look forward to your questions. And again, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Jen. You have tried to highlight the how do you protect cloud infrastructure, which is definitely going to become as critical as many other infrastructure as we look at the rate at which we are adopting cloud, and almost all businesses are moving on to this. And your comment on use of data analytics and artificial intelligence to address some of these issues was quite an interesting thing, and I think that's one of the way to go. Thank you. May I now request Mr. Waitley Kamlek, Director, Asia Threat Research Center, Kaspersky, to share his thoughts.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vitaly Kamluk. I head a research team for Asia Pacific at Kaspersky Lab. I'm based in Singapore, and today I would like to be very brief because we are running out of time apparently for this panel. Still, I wanted you to remember just one word of my speech, which is transparency. This is what I'm going to focus on. I think this is the foundation of the true security, reliable security. It is based on transparency, and I'll tell you why. I'm talking from my own experience. Our team has been tracking this advanced actor, and that's what we do day to day, we are following these nation-state sponsor actors, advanced actors penetrating CIA. So one of them was, maybe you remember from the last year, story of the Bangladesh central bank heist, where almost $1 billion were attempted to be stolen. So that attacker is still out there, it's still active, and we see them in multiple other countries. So we've seen them in Europe, we've seen them in Latin America, we've seen them in Africa, we've seen them not so far from here. Just last month, they popped up in Taiwan. They tried to steal $60 million by compromising and infecting the server connected to the Swift messaging system. So if you think about transparency in the context, this is something that we actually shall reinforce with positive incentives. Because if we don't do that to all those banks and all those other organizations that are being targeted, it actually falls into the trap of compliance. Now, everybody who does compliance knows that it doesn't guarantee security. Now, if you think about all those banks that were compromised by Lazarus, did they fail at compliance? Most of them didn't. Still, they were a victim. Now, what do we know about that attacker? Our company, our team works as a mediator. We contact them. We try to work with them for free. We don't charge for our service. So what we take in exchange is information about the attacker and about how the attack happened. This knowledge is invaluable. We can pass it to others to be prepared to increase security of the rest. And we, of course, anonymize the source. So this is the deal that works. We bring them positive incentives in the form of help, free help, in exchange for information. Now, let me mention another case. Our own company, Kaspersky Lab, has been picked by a very advanced nation-state sponsored attacker. We were compromised. We were hit in the very heart of our research. Now, what helped us survive was being honest and being transparent. We did proper investigation. We showed what they were after, what other victims they were hitting, what was their motivation, how they operated, what 0 days they have used. We reported it to the vendors, and then they patched it. We increased security of the world by being transparent. So I think this is the word that shall remain in your minds if you are an information security officer, if you are a policymaker. This is something that must be the key in all your decisions in the future. Now, some of you may be familiar and aware of the media scandal that is happening now around our company in the Western media. And I wanted to say a few words here. Most of those allegations were coming from anonymous sources and were baseless. There were no proofs whatsoever. So our response here to survive will be the same when we were attacked with a targeted attack. It will be transparency. Now, to conclude my words, I wanted to say that the cyber attacks that we investigate in, those advanced cyber attacks, they definitely respect no borders. They're cross-border, and this is like everybody knows that. Still, that means for us that we're actually sailing on the same ship with you, all of us. With the growth of technology and unexpected development of new platforms, new techniques, new technologies, we actually always constantly entering the new waters on the same boat. And if somebody doesn't report, if somebody does not cooperate, that means we will all sink together. Please remember about transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Truly appreciate for your valuable and brief comment. May I now request Mr. John Suffolk, President, Huawei Technologies, to share his thoughts.
Thank you, esteemed panel, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know time is short. We've heard this afternoon about hardware, we've heard about software, we've heard about cloud computing, we've heard about policies and procedures, international laws and regulations, or a lack of them. We've heard about insider threats, we've heard about physical security. Let me, if I may, spend a few minutes saying none of that is important if we execute nothing. Why do we waste all our time coming to conferences like this and we go home and it doesn't change behavior? You know, Jan has talked about the global supply chain, and others have. Here we are as a vendor, we invent 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. We invent cloud computing, artificial intelligence. And if we think we have problems today, good luck CSOs in the next few years, when you have a whole range of new autonomous technology interfacing with a whole host of legacy technology, some of that in the critical infrastructure, and you guys and girls, you will be held accountable for the success or failure. Our track record today as a security industry is appalling, and we should hold our heads in shame about how terrible we are. What is the point in having a vulnerability disclosure program if nobody patches the basics of their technology? So I think we need not just to talk about frameworks and policies and procedures, but what are the incentives and disincentives for behavior? You've seen the picture of the man on the donkey with the carrot on the stick and the whip in his hand. What are the equivalents for security? If somebody is not implementing basic hygiene, should we give them an incentive or should we smack them on the bottom? What happens if directors of organizations running critical infrastructures have a major breach? Should they be banned for life from ever being a director again? Should governments be having the transparency? I believe sunlight is the greatest disinfectant in all. Where are the scorecards and the benchmarks which are telling people you can trust this company? They do these things to best practice. It's not a guarantee, but they do these things to best practice. So I think we need to move away from the fancy talk and the international collaboration and start holding people to account in a positive way. Not because we want to harm people, because we want to digitize the world. Technology fundamentally improves people's lives. If we want digital India to be successful, we want it to be a digitally clean India. We want the world to be digitally clean. There are things we can do if we put our minds to it, but there is no point focusing on international law if we've left all the doors open from bad patching and bad hygiene. So I think we should be encouraging our policymakers, we should be encouraging our politicians, we should be encouraging the Indian government as they hand over this conference to the next country to say, when we get together in a year or 18 months' time, our focus is on action, our focus is on hygiene, our focus is on transparency. Let's cut out the talk, move to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. You have really drawn our attention to a different aspect. We have a very beautiful program called Swachh Bharat, driven by our Prime Minister. Now you've given us a new thing to do with Digitally Clean India. We'll definitely do deliberation on it. I think before going much into it to panelists, since the time is short, I'll now open to the audience for their questions. Can somebody pass the mics, please?
Thank you. My name is Jiwon Kim. I'm working in Korean National Defense. In cybersecurity, it's important to sharing threat information, such as threat status, flag IP list, and domains. But in sharing of information, a department or company having key information that perceive the threat doesn't want to share it with other company and department. Yes. Would you please tell us any idea or experience of solving this kind of real case? And one more question: do you have any supportive policy for encouraging white hackers? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of scorecards, actually, the world is full of scorecards. Just go and look on the NIST library of the SP800, and you will find many scorecards. Go to the ENISA library in Europe, and you will find a whole host of libraries in terms of scorecards on what best practice looks like. Now, I rephrase that. What basic practice looks like. One word of advice. Don't get hung up on all the management stuff. Every standard scorecard you come across will go on about roles and responsibilities, governance structures, asset inventories. Whilst that's all important, focus on what fundamentally is happening to protect your infrastructure. There are many available. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, and I'll point you in the direction.
I'm not sure if I clearly understood the question, but did you also ask about what can help companies to talk more about their problems? Like, because they don't want actually to definitely risk their reputation, right? Is that what you mean? Okay. So something that worked for us when we did offer help to these companies is like full protection of their identity. We respect their right to not say we've been breached. Some of them feel vulnerable at this moment. They are still not prepared to stand up and say, we are company ABC that have been hit. Still, to help others, we need to learn from that attack. We need to learn from the incident. That's why we carefully protect the confidentiality of all those materials that are passed to us, and we protect the identity of the company. That works like a good deal. So it has to be business to business, or organization to organization, that extracts the forensic information, extracts the investigation details, and then anonymizes it and makes it available to the larger public community. So this what can work. Please do not enforce reporting, because again, it may be a trap that we fall into and will now come back, because when people feel forced to report, they try to find workarounds and ways to conceal that the incident took place. Thank you.
Sir, I want to know what will you suggest to clean the networks from malware, virus, and even porn content in the television form, in the video content?
His question is, how do you clean malware? How do you clean this whole net from virus, worms, and malware?
Let me get myself into trouble. Coming into most countries and continents are a small number of undersea cables. Leaving most continents are a small number of undersea cables. And across all of these undersea cables carries the vast majority of internet traffic. We in this room, and governments around the world, and organizations on this panel and others, have brilliant technology that can clean the vast majority of junk off those pipes. So why don't we, collectively, as an international community, take those undersea cables and pipes into international ownership, take the very best technology, put it on those entry and exit points, and clean it up before it leaves any country or enters any country. A tangible action governments at this conference today can take. Then what you need to do is to get your ISPs internally within the continent to make sure they are cleaning the content. And that's a policy decision for the governments. Two tangible approaches to clean much of the rubbish that we have to come across day by day.
Yes, I agree. I think the ISPs can play a critical role as far as propagation of these things goes over the networks. Next question, please.
Hello. I am Kifli from Indonesian National Crypto and Cyber Agency. My question is, right now in cybersecurity, we know that every country, every organization trying to do strengthening their own organization. Everyone doing red team, blue team to prevent that. But my question is, how do we encourage our capability in handling cyber incident related to the incident that not source from ours? What I mean is, some organization maybe the problem is in electricity that being hit, or maybe the telco that being hit? How do we handle this, especially related to the CII? Thank you.
I think what he's trying to basically say is that many a time threat is emanating from one infrastructure and is trying to impact on the other infrastructure. It could be within the same country or it could be from the different geographies. So how do we address? I think one the fundamental thing, if we see in any CI policy of any country, the cooperation and collaboration is very critical between the various infrastructures, and as we are moving more and more connected kind of a world. As far as it is across the countries, this one of the theme in this is what is called cyber diplomacy, where we really need to have either bilateral or multilateral kind of an arrangements where we help each other address these kind of challenges. And I think even at the European Union level or even at the United Nations level or even G8, all these partnerships which are there, these kind of things are being discussed and a common framework to address, because this is something which is a concern for everyone, is being evolved. So it's an evolving thing. A lot of agreements are happening. Some countries are having into bilateral agreements and some were multilateral agreements also. Anything else anyone would like to add?
Oh, if I understood the question right, it was a little bit outside of the cyber threat scope, right? It's more about like reliability and continuity. Well, technologically we can try to achieve that by just implementing proper monitoring and diagnostics. That's what usually is done in this area, but it's definitely outside of scope of my expertise, so I can't comment much.
Next question.
Good afternoon. My question is to Jane from Microsoft. It's good that you spoke about OT and IT. We do a lot of consulting for IoT and we deploy solutions. And I'm sure you are aware that in most of the OT networks run very old operating systems of Microsoft. The easiest way to tell them is to upgrade to the new one, but I think that's not going to work. You as Microsoft, you must have realized the volume of such older operating systems working. If today they have to be secure while connecting to the cloud, is there a plan for Microsoft?
That's a great question. Thanks for raising that. And I just want to maybe at the start say not all of that is running on our stuff. So I think it is a broader problem than that. But you're absolutely right. It does come down. And I think John made that point very eloquently. It does come down to the fact that this is a shared responsibility. We as providers absolutely have the first responsibility to make sure that we're building software securely. But there's also an element where those that are running critical infrastructure have a responsibility to run secure systems and to upgrade to more modern both operating systems and more modern hardware, right? And I think that's what we're seeing right now, where we really do have a huge legacy challenge. We have a huge legacy challenge that is not limited to critical infrastructures, but it's probably most concerning with regard to critical infrastructures. And in the past, it sort of worked because these things weren't as connected, right? They were sort of air-gapped or they were contained and there was no need to connect any of this. But now as companies are entering the phase where they want to get much more data analytics that they want to run about their things, they want to increase their efficiency and learn a lot more from the data that they can glean from their processes. These things are rapidly becoming connected. And so there's a critical need to deploy modern operating systems, modern hardware that has security built in, software that has security built in. And we're certainly actively encouraging through information sharing, awareness raising campaigns, working with governments, working with groups like ENISA in Europe, working with CERTs and CSERTs around the country, around the globe, to try and actually highlight the awareness of these challenges, because ultimately we want those critical infrastructures to be secure. And so it does have to be, I think, a partnership between what manufacturers can do, what customers need to do, and then what some of the sticks and carrots governments can actually put in place. I think there is a role there for government as well.
Yep. Hello. Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Manoj Kulshrestha from Nation Informatics Center. My question is about this CII, which is the topic of this presentation. See, I wish to know, in India, do we have such repository where we can enroll our system? Let's say I'm running system which is I think it's a critical one. So is there any repository in India or there's some process where I can enroll the system, for this making or declare it as a critical infrastructure? Because in IT Act it is mentioned about it, but I'm not aware of where, I should go for this. So
You're
that's
asking
my-
in Indian context.
Yeah, it's purely
Yeah.
in Indian context.
So I think in Indian context, as ITX puts, and we already have this National Center for National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. That is a place where you basically need to report with respect to in case you're operating any of the, and they have their framework and guidelines which once you kind of get into their ambit have to follow, and then they have the whole system of audit of these things from time to time.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Hello.
Two last questions, please.
Okay, mine is the last
Yeah,
one
he's been saying
question. So, my name is Madhava Turumala. I'm from London, UK. I run a company called CoVenture. I have been listening and reading all these policy documents and all, but my apprehension is that we are not catching up with the future at the rapid pace at which the technology is evolving. For example, 3 weeks back, I was at Microsoft conference in London, and Microsoft gave an amazing presentation about the quantum computing, and they have made leaps and bounds technology advancement. This quantum computer, once maybe Microsoft is sitting on it, we don't know, they can tell, and there are other guys who are already, Chinese may be building one, and all nation states are building supercomputers which are capable of breaking down that which takes today 256 years encryption. It could be done in 3 seconds and 4 seconds, it could be broken down. Then that brings me the question, and actually, John, we made a fantastic point where the people who are operating these infrastructures have to be sanctified. There has to be a kind of ethical framework that needs to be taught to these guys, and that's one. And then, Sanjay, you also mentioned about people and infrastructure. And my question to you is that there is this data at a transit where we are storing the data and we're protecting it like Fort Knox, which is brilliant. But when it is in between these pipelines where it is under transit, correct? When it is in the transit, a hacker, it's the most vulnerable point is the transit point. So during the transit point, if the supercomputer comes into picture, as a quantum computer comes into picture, it could break down anything. So, but the frameworks and the policies, I don't read anything which is trying to catch up with the very few, in the few years' time, it looks like it's going to be a reality, and all our frameworks will fall down. So, is anyone working on it at the government level? I want to know.
I think that is really a good question. Technology is evolving at faster rate than anyone can respond. So I'm completely with you, and I don't think anybody here in the panelist or in the audience going to disagree with that. So my perspective of specific case that you brought up, quantum computing is going to be able to break existing cryptography, right? The one what we use can be broken very soon once those computers become available, and cloud is perfect environment. I don't have to buy quantum computer. Instead, I can buy service from somebody who is offering, which is going to be cheap and affordable, and we can do that. So there are some efforts across the world. I don't know whether it's appropriate to name countries, but there are efforts to mitigate that issue. It is a real threat, real issue. And there is a lot of work going on to address those, and some of the companies probably sitting here involved in those efforts along with government, and this is not completely ignored. There is a work being done, but I agree with you, may not be the level it needs. So always when it comes to these policies, frameworks, they are very fundamental in nature, and the bar is really low to medium. They don't go to solving every problem in the world or every problem in the security. In this case, I think one of the problems you brought up is very advanced, and there are some efforts going on, but I'm with you, may not be to the satisfaction of everyone in the room here.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't take any more questions because I have people for the next session already standing. You can talk to the audience. I'm extremely sorry for this. Time is something which I cannot. So I'd like now to formally close this session. I'd like to thank all distinguished panelists for their really valuable comments. I think what we have really concluded is that protection of critical infrastructure is very, very pertinent at this point of time. And we have been doing something as countries, but we have lot more to do, whether it is in terms of policy, in terms of behavior, or in terms of capacity building, or in terms of addressing these new challenges which we are going to go. So it's something, and I'm sure in the next conference we will definitely have this session again of this topic. And I'll also like to thank all my audience here. You have been very, very patiently hearing and for your interesting questions. Thank you very much. And at the end, I also like to thank Rama and team who have really helped us putting this session together. Thank you very much.